No one was expecting you here, but you ended up right where great history begins, in the very heart of dust, exhaustion, and indifference. While future generations will admire the grandeur of Persepolis, you, the invisible observer, see something else entirely. Curses, clay tablets, rituals, and blood, nameless hands breaking stones for someone else's glory. Here, under the merciless sun, every day feels like an eternity, and greatness is measured not by the height of the columns, but by the number of broken backs, vanished names, and pointless orders. You are part of this forgotten majority, building a city not for yourself, but for those who will never know the true cost of greatness. Welcome to Persepolis. Here, history is dust, pain, and endless fatigue. Here, nobody cares about you, but you will remember, even if no one else does. But before you settle in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I'm really curious to see who's joining us. Now, get comfortable. Let's begin. You wake up in the middle of what looks, at first, like the most uninspiring stretch of land imaginable. The earth is dry and hard, crusted with a thin, powdery layer of dust that seeps into your sandals and your nostrils and your hair. Somewhere in the haze, someone is snoring, although it is impossible to tell if the snore belongs to a human, a half-starved animal, or merely the wind rolling over a pile of discarded cloth. You have arrived at the place where Persepolis, the soon-to-be great capital of a vast empire, will one day stand. For now, however, you are surrounded by nothing but a collection of uneven mounds. Mounds that are not yet walls, not yet terraces, not yet anything except promises. In the far distance, the hills are as indifferent to human ambition as the sun is to the backs of the workers already stumbling out of their makeshift tents. You try to convince yourself that you are witnessing history in the making, but mostly you are witnessing history before it has done anything interesting at all. The first thing you notice is the endless monotony of brown. Brown dirt, brown rocks, brown bits of clay scattered around, with the resigned attitude of a people who have learned not to hope for green. If you squint, you can almost imagine what the future city will look like. Towering columns, broad ceremonial staircases, friezes of lions and kings. But squinting only gives you a headache and a mouthful of dust, so you stop. Somewhere nearby, a group of men is arguing in voices that are not so much angry as simply tired. One is holding a stick and waving it at the ground, possibly to indicate where a wall should go, or possibly just to give his arm something to do. Another is writing something on a clay tablet with the slow, deliberate care of someone who knows that in 100 years, no one will ever read what he writes. There are no streets here, not yet. There are only lines scratched in the dirt by someone's idea of organization. You wonder who decided that this was the place for an imperial capital. Was it the king, a priest, a bored astrologer? Whoever it was, you suspect they have never spent a night here, surrounded by the eternal company of stones and invisible insects. You take a step and immediately regret it. The ground is uneven, as if the earth itself has refused to cooperate with the plans of men. Your sandal catches on a small boulder and you stumble. No one notices. The workers are too busy hauling buckets of mud, or sleeping with their faces in their arms, or arguing in 5 different languages about the relative merits of different types of straw for thatching roofs that do not yet exist. The sun is just beginning to rise, but already the air is thick and oppressive. You can smell smoke, or maybe it is just the dust burning in the morning heat. Somewhere, a dog barks and then falls silent, as if embarrassed by its own enthusiasm. You try to count how many people are here, but counting is made difficult by the constant movement and the way everyone seems to blend into the background. 50, 100, perhaps more. Most are men, but there are also a few women, their faces hidden by scarves, carrying baskets twice as large as their bodies. No one speaks to you, which you take as a sign of wisdom on their part. The only shade comes from a ragged tent, strung up with ropes that look as if they were borrowed from a shipwreck. Underneath, someone has set up what might one day become an office. For now, it is just a low table, a cracked jug of water, and a pile of tablets. The man sitting behind the table glances up at you, yawns, and goes back to staring at nothing in particular. You realize, with a sinking feeling, that the story of Persepolis does not begin with a grand proclamation, a stirring speech, or a vision of glory. It begins with tired people, too much dust, and the slow, relentless business of moving rocks from one place to another. There is no music except for the coughs and groans of laborers whose only reward will be a bowl of thin gruel and a few hours of dreamless sleep. Someone calls out a command, and the workers shuffle into a loose line, ready to begin another day that will look exactly like the day before. You think about the centuries that will pass, the kings who will walk these stones, the visitors who will marvel at the city's splendor. For now, though, there is nothing to marvel at except your own persistence in remaining awake. You look around once more, trying to find something that might break the monotony. A lizard scuttles across your path, pauses, and looks at you as if to say, "Why are you here?" You do not have an answer, and so you watch the lizard disappear beneath a pile of rocks. The day begins. Persepolis is not yet a city or even an idea. It is only a promise, whispered by dust and stone in a language that only the tired understand. You do not get far before you notice him. The overseer stands not in the middle of the action, but slightly to the side, positioned as if he is part of the landscape, like an ancient tree that sprouted, grew, and simply refused to die. He is a tall man, but his back is already beginning to curve with the habitual bend of someone who has spent too many years squinting at things that refuse to become straight. His hair is the color of stone after rain, neither black nor gray nor brown, but a weary combination of all three. You are not sure how long he has been here, but his eyes tell you It has been too long. The skin around those eyes is lined and puffy, and they have the color of quarried limestone, dull but somehow implacable. His mouth is a thin line, rarely moving except to mutter numbers under his breath. The numbers of workers present, the number of stones delivered, the number of complaints ignored. The overseer wears a tunic that was probably once white, now transformed by dust and sweat into something resembling old parchment. He moves without hurry, but with the slow determination of someone who knows that nothing in this place ever truly moves quickly, except perhaps misfortune. In his hand is a stick, which he uses not as a tool of authority, but as a pointer for invisible diagrams only he can see. He does not greet you. He does not greet anyone. Instead, he surveys the chaos with a look that could be mistaken for interest if you did not already know that it was simply practiced resignation. Occasionally, he raises the stick and points. There, a cart is in the wrong place. Over there, a pile of stone is not high enough. The workers nod and shuffle, but you suspect that they will move the cart back again the moment his back is turned. A young boy approaches the overseer and hands him a tablet of clay. The boy's hands are shaking, not with fear, but with exhaustion. The overseer glances at the tablet, frowns, and scratches something into it with a stylus. The boy waits, silent, then takes the tablet back and vanishes into the sea of laborers. You try to imagine the overseer as a young man, perhaps even as a child, when he believed that building a city would mean glory, or at least a decent lunch. Now, you see, he moves through his duties with the mechanical patience of someone who has learned that the city will be built not by inspiration, but by counting every step, every drop of water, every measure of grain. You can almost hear his thoughts. If 100 men can carry 20 stones each by midday, and if half of them do not collapse before then, how many days will it take to move 1,000 stones? The answer, of course, is never as optimistic as he hopes. Every few minutes, the overseer glances up at the sun, as if checking to see if it is time for a meal, or perhaps simply wishing for a cloud to pass by and offer a brief moment of shade. His only moments of visible emotion come when he sees a mistake, someone digging in the wrong place, a mark in the ground misunderstood, a cart tipped over, and its contents spilling out like a metaphor for the entire project. Then, for an instant, his face twists in exasperation, a reminder that even those who appear carved from stone still have nerves. You watch as he walks the site, his footsteps tracing the beginnings of a road that does not yet exist. He stops to confer with another man, maybe a foreman, maybe just the only other person awake enough to listen. They exchange a few words, too quiet for you to hear. There is a brief flare of irritation, a gesture toward the horizon, a resigned shrug. The overseer writes something on another clay tablet. You wonder how many of those tablets end up simply broken and tossed aside, like so many dreams of early completion. After a while, the overseer approaches a group of workers who have found a large stone embedded in the earth too heavy to move. He studies the situation, then points to a lever, mutters a few instructions, and steps back to watch as they struggle. When the stone finally shifts, he does not cheer or offer praise. He simply makes a mark on his tablet, as if noting the weather, and moves on. Occasionally, you catch the overseer glancing at the distant hills, eyes narrowing. Perhaps he is imagining what this place will become, or perhaps he is simply counting the hours until dusk. There is no poetry in his movements, only repetition. Walk, point, right, sigh. You notice, with a kind of reluctant respect, that the overseer knows the name of nearly every worker on the site. He calls out to them, not kindly, but with the brisk familiarity of a man who has memorized their strengths and their weaknesses, and who knows precisely how little can be expected from each. When someone calls back to him in a language he does not understand, he shrugs and moves on. There are too many languages here, too many faces, too many problems for any one man to fix. By midday, the overseer sits for a moment on a broken block of stone. He drinks from a cracked cup, wipes his brow with the edge of his tunic, and stares out at the horizon with a look that is almost hopeful. Almost. Then he stands, sighs, and resumes his march, an endless circle around a city that does not yet exist. You find yourself wondering how many years it takes to forget that you once had dreams. The overseer, you suspect, knows the answer, but he will never tell you. Instead, he will count the stones, the men, the hours, and the mistakes until someday, perhaps, there is nothing left to count. There is a certain art to watching bureaucracy in action, although art is perhaps too optimistic a word. You soon realize that here, in the heart of a city that does not yet exist, nothing moves without first being recorded, counted, checked, approved, and written down upon an object that will almost certainly be broken, lost, or misread within a week. The true foundation of Persepolis, you discover, is not stone or mud, but clay tablets, hundreds of them, thousands perhaps, each bearing the fingernail marks and frustrated sighs of a small army of scribes. Your first encounter with this bureaucracy is almost accidental. You are searching for water, which already feels like a fool's errand in this sunburnt wasteland. You follow the sound of grumbling voices until you reach a battered tent flapping in the wind. Inside, three men and one woman sit cross-legged on woven mats, surrounded by stacks of small clay rectangles. There is a smell of dust, sweat, and something faintly sour, perhaps the ink or the resentment. The woman looks up, squinting as if she is not sure whether you are a worker, a messenger, or an exceptionally tall rat. She asks what you want, but before you can answer, a scribe thrusts a tablet into your hand. Sign here, he says, not bothering to look up. You try to make sense of the cuneiform script, but it is a sea of wedges and lines, each mark as unforgiving as the desert sun. You scratch something that might be your name, or possibly a very abstract bird. The scribe does not notice. He snatches back the tablet, makes a notation in the margin, and drops it on a pile that teeters precariously. It turns out that nothing, absolutely nothing, happens without a tablet. Want water? Fill out a tablet. Need more bricks? Another tablet. Requesting a new pickaxe because the old one snapped in half for the third time this week? Two tablets. One for the request, one for the incident report. If you have a complaint about the sun, which is a frequent topic here, the process is even more elaborate. You will need to fill out three tablets, all in triplicate, and deliver them to a tent at the far edge of the site, where someone will tell you, with admirable politeness, that the sun is beyond their jurisdiction. Each tablet is carefully stored in a basket lined with straw, the most precious commodity in Persepolis. The baskets are labeled with strings and tags, some in Old Persian, others in Elamite or Babylonian cuneiform. No one agrees on which language is correct, but everyone agrees that losing a basket is an unforgivable sin. There are whispered stories of a scribe who once misplaced an entire week's worth of ration records. The overseer did not shout or curse. He simply stared at the scribe for a very long time until the poor man packed up and left, never to be seen again. Some say he became a shepherd, others say he is still wandering, looking for the lost records. You soon learn to spot the different types of tablets by smell and weight. Water tablets are smaller, slightly warped from being handled by too many sweaty hands. Brick requisitions are thicker and tend to have fingerprints pressed so deeply into them that you can almost reconstruct the nervous habits of the workers. Complaint tablets are the heaviest, as if weighted down by collective despair. Sometimes you see a scribe pause while inscribing a complaint, shake his head, and add an extra line for emphasis. You suspect that these lines are not part of the official script, but a personal flourish, a way of fighting back against the endless monotony. There is an entire class of workers whose only job is to deliver tablets from one tent to another. These runners dart across the site with frantic energy, clutching bundles of clay, dodging oxen and piles of rubble. You watch one particularly nimble boy navigate through a gauntlet of shovels and wheels, only to trip at the last moment and scatter tablets across the dust. He falls to his knees, cursing softly, and begins the hopeless task of matching each tablet to its intended basket. No one helps him. Everyone knows that the bureaucracy must be fed and that no one is ever forgiven for dropping a complaint about rations into the basket labeled for tool repairs. The most terrifying figure is not the overseer, but the chief scribe, a woman with a hawk's profile and an ability to recite a month's worth of records from memory. She can tell you, at any given moment, exactly how many bricks have been ordered, lost, or broken since sunrise. Her eyes are sharp and her tongue sharper. She is known to read back a list of mistakes, line by line, to anyone foolish enough to argue with her calculations. There are rumors that even the king himself would hesitate before questioning her figures. At the end of the day, when the sun has turned the tents into ovens and the workers into silent ghosts, you find yourself sitting near a pile of discarded tablets. You pick one up at random and run your thumb over the marks. Someone's story is pressed into the clay, a request for an extra loaf of bread, denied. Another asks for a day's rest, also denied. Yet another, written with unusual neatness, is simply an inventory of sandals. How many have worn out? How many are left? The numbers are grim. You realize that while the great palace may one day rise above these plains, it will be built on a mountain of clay tablets, each recording some small hope, some fleeting frustration, some tiny act of resistance or resignation. The bureaucracy of Persepolis is not merely a means of control, it is the city's nervous system twitching with the pain and weariness of those who will never be remembered. And as the sky grows dark and the scribes finally put down their styluses, you understand. The story of Persepolis is being written, stroke by tedious stroke, by those whose names are pressed forever into the clay, destined to be forgotten, yet never entirely erased. You spend some days watching the site, and by now you have learned to look beyond the dust and the endless paperwork. There is a quiet river of humanity flowing through the beginnings of Persepolis, a procession not of heroes, but of ordinary people dragged here by fate, hunger, or the unfortunate misfortune of being noticed by someone in authority. You might have expected a workforce made up solely of sturdy Persian men with gleaming eyes, eager to carve their legacy into history. The reality is less glorious and much, much more crowded. Instead, you see people from all corners of the empire and from far beyond its edges, an accidental gathering of languages, faces, and stories. There are Elamites with their clipped accents, Babylonians who curse the local food, Egyptians who wrap their heads in cloth to keep out the sun, Scythians who spit in the dust and complain loudly about the lack of horses, and Greeks who refuse to be impressed by anything ever. The sight is an orchestra of sound and misunderstanding. 10 languages drift across the wind at once, and none of them are yours. Every command must be repeated, explained, demonstrated, acted out, and then inevitably ignored. You watch a supervisor try to explain how to lay bricks to a group of men who respond by building a small, perfect oven instead. The supervisor sighs, writes something angry on a clay tablet, and lets them keep the oven. Not everyone is a man. There are women, though they are less obvious, hidden behind layers of dust and cloth, moving with silent efficiency. Some carry baskets of water or stones. Others tend to children, who seem determined to crawl into the most dangerous places possible. There are older men with backs like sickles and hands calloused beyond belief. There are boys too young for this work, their faces tense with effort, too proud to rest, already dreaming of something better than this. Some workers bear tattoos or scars that mark them as prisoners of war. Others wear necklaces of woven string that identify their tribe, clan, or, more commonly, their debts. There is a quiet hierarchy, enforced not by law, but by the weight of reputation and rumor. The men who move the heaviest stones are respected, but also feared, muscles built on anger and resignation. The fastest bricklayers get the best spots in the tent at night, and the slowest are left to sleep in the open, prey to scorpions and mosquitoes. You notice how every group is marked, sometimes literally. Some wear scraps of colored cloth on their sleeves or in their hair. Others have numbers pressed into tokens hanging from their necks. You ask a scribe once, and he tells you the colors are for payment, the numbers for ration, the tokens for tracking who has wandered off and who has returned. No one comes here of their own free will, he says, but everyone leaves the same way, invisible. As the sun rises each day, the workers are called together with a horn that sounds less like a call to greatness and more like the groan of a wounded bull. Each group lines up before a different supervisor, sometimes by language, sometimes by task, sometimes simply by whoever was awake first. The roll call is slow and inefficient. Someone is always missing, and someone else is always found asleep under a cart. The overseer keeps a tally on his tablet, his mouth moving in silent calculation. You watch the first hour of labor and realize that the real miracle of Persepolis is not in its stones, but in the fact that anyone does anything at all. Men haul baskets of gravel, women sweep the dust, children chase after the animals that inevitably escape their tethers. There is a steady rhythm: grunt, lift, shuffle, drop. Now and then a song drifts across the sight, the melody unrecognizable, the words lost to the wind, but the tone unmistakable: boredom, despair, endurance. When the midday sun hits, the work slows to a crawl. The supervisors try to hurry the laborers along, but their own shadows grow short and their tempers grow shorter. Lunch is a communal affair, if it can be called lunch at all. A thin gruel is doled out, one scoop at a time, from a cauldron that never seems to empty, possibly because it never contains much. Bread is handed out in chunks, hard enough to chip a tooth. The workers eat in silence or mutter in their own languages. Once you hear laughter, and it is so rare that even the overseer pauses to look. The children are the first to return to work because their jobs are considered too trivial to be worth resting from. They sweep the stones, fill the water jars, and carry messages between supervisors. You wonder if they remember a time when their days were different, or if this has always been their world. Sun, dust, stone, and orders shouted in words they barely understand. Not all is misery. Now and then you see small acts of kindness, a shared piece of fruit, a joke passed along in pantomime, someone helping an older man to his feet. These moments are as rare as rain and just as fleeting, but you learn to treasure them. In the evenings, as the sun sets and the shadows grow long, some workers gather around small fires to tell stories. You do not understand the words, but the rhythms are universal: tales of lost homes, foolish kings, and impossible tasks. The supervisors, meanwhile, retreat to their own circle, where they compare notes and complaints, exchanging rumors of new decrees from the king, new taxes, new reasons to worry. You hear one say that the king plans to visit the site in a year, or perhaps a decade. No one seems excited by this. Another supervisor claims that a fortune teller has predicted rain, and everyone laughs. As darkness settles over the site, you realize that you have never seen so many people together and yet so alone. The empire is vast, but the people who build it are isolated by language, by task, by fate. There is no single spirit here, only 1,000 tiny desperations, stitched together by routine and necessity. You watch them settle into sleep, sprawled across the earth, and you wonder if the city they build will ever belong to them, or if they will vanish like the dust, swept away by the next wind, forgotten by the time the first stone of the palace is set in place. And as the fires die down and the first cold creeps in, you find yourself grateful that, for tonight, you are just another watcher, one more shadow in a land of exiles, waiting for morning. There are ceremonies, and then there are ceremonies. You have seen the former, quick, perfunctory, just enough ritual to placate whoever is keeping the tally of such things. But this day, in the dust and glare, you witness the latter, the grand and lumbering spectacle marking the laying of the first stone for the city that is supposed to define an empire. This, you are told repeatedly, is important. You are expected to be impressed. From sunrise, nothing feels ordinary. The workers are herded into lines, washed faces and tunics, inspected for stains, and even the overseer has found a sash of faded purple to wrap around his weary frame. Rumors fly. The king himself will appear. There will be gifts. There will be a feast, or at the very least, double rations of gruel. The only certainty is the sudden arrival of priests, one, then two, then three, then what seems like an uncountable procession of holy men, each dressed in layers of white that are already turning the color of dust. You lose count at 20, but you suspect there are more. The first stone is not a stone in the way you imagined. It is a massive block, hauled in on a wooden sledge by an ensemble of oxen, slaves, and local volunteers, all sweating and grunting under the weight of the stone and the expectations placed upon it. The stone itself is nothing special, gray, square, with a few half-hearted attempts at carving on its face. Yet the entire city pauses to watch it move, inch by agonizing inch, across the clearing. The priests begin their chanting, voices rising and falling in a language that even the local scribes find difficult to follow. Some recite prayers to Ahura Mazda, others mumble half remembered incantations for the favor of local spirits. Incense is burned, its smoke drifting lazily over the crowd. You watch as one priest circles the stone with a brush dipped in wine, another sprinkles barley in careful arcs, a third breaks a clay tablet on the ground and whispers something about blessings. You wonder how many gods must be convinced before a stone can rest in the dirt. The workers stand at attention, uncertain whether to look solemn or bored. Children have climbed onto piles of rubble for a better view. A few of the braver ones try to mimic the priest's gestures, much to the annoyance of the nearest scribe. Somewhere in the crowd, someone coughs. You try to count the number of priests again, but they seem to have multiplied. Perhaps they are splitting off like droplets of oil on water. After what feels like an eternity of chanting and pouring and waving of branches, there is a pause. The overseer steps forward, forced to play his part. He glances at the priests, who glare at him with the barely concealed hostility of men whose status depends on the obedience of others. The overseer touches the stone, murmurs a phrase that might have been rehearsed, but sounds weary and unconvincing. A scribe marks the moment on a clay tablet. Somewhere, a goat bleats in complaint. Now comes the important part. The priests invite a young girl, daughter of one of the laborers, to lay a garland of wilted flowers across the stone. This, apparently, is to symbolize hope and continuity, or perhaps just to use up the last of the wilted flowers before they become a health hazard. The crowd holds its breath. The girl is nervous, her hands shaking, but she completes her task without incident. The priests nod approvingly, as if she has just solved the problem of mortality. Then, finally, with a great deal of heaving, sweating, and shouting, the workers are allowed to slide the stone into its intended position. The sound is disappointingly mundane, a dull, heavy thud, the scrape of wood on dirt, and a collective sigh of relief that can be heard all the way to the river. A horn blows. The ceremony is over. There is no feast, no gifts, and the double rations turn out to be a myth unless you count a second helping of dust. The priests linger, collecting what is left of the incense and checking for lost items. You watch as one of them quietly pockets a silver amulet that someone left on a rock. The workers break formation, shuffle back to their posts, and begin the next task as if nothing has changed. You realize that for all the ritual, all the prayers and pronouncements, the only thing that has truly changed is the number of complaints being recorded by the scribes. The first stone sits alone in the center of the site, adorned with its fading garland, watched by no one. You walk past it later and notice that already someone has smeared a streak of mud across its face. Tomorrow it will be joined by hundreds of other stones, and the memory of its specialness will fade as quickly as the incense smoke. As dusk approaches, you overhear a pair of workers debating whether the ceremony was worth missing an hour of rest. One insists it was the will of the gods. The other points out that the stone looks exactly like every other stone, except maybe a bit dirtier now. Their voices are tired, but not unkind. The overseer passes by, muttering to himself about schedules and manpower, already erasing the memory of the day with lists and numbers. You realize, not for the first time, that history is made up of moments that feel important in the telling, but quickly become ordinary in the living. The first stone is down, and the city will rise, and somewhere someone will record all of this on a clay tablet, and someone else will misplace the tablet, and the priests will move on to their next ceremony. The stars come out, indifferent and cold, and Persepolis is no longer a blank canvas. It is a city with one stone, heavy, sacred, and as unremarkable as the men and women who will spend the next years stacking stone upon stone until no one remembers which was the first or who placed it there. You find the stone carvers on the far edge of the site, away from the shouts of laborers and the impatient glares of overseers. Their workshop is not a building, but an open space, half shaded by a makeshift awning strung between two piles of rejected boulders. From dawn until dusk, the only music here is the relentless tap tap of chisel against stone, a sound as rhythmic as breathing and almost as necessary. They are a strange breed, the stone carvers. You expected craftsmen with the energy of artists, faces lit with pride as they carved the future into every slab. Instead, you find men and women with expressions set in stone, their features as fixed and unyielding as the lion heads and soldiers they slowly coax from limestone. There is no laughter here, and barely any talk, just the occasional grunt or muttered curse as a chisel slips or a bit of sand flicks up into an eye. You watch as one carver leans over a half-finished frieze, his fingers running lightly over the outlines scored into the stone. He traces the curve of a beard, the edge of a wing, then picks up his chisel and resumes his work with a kind of grim patience. His hands are scarred, the knuckles permanently dusted with a fine powder. You notice he does not blink often, perhaps afraid to miss a moment where the stone might resist him. The overseer rarely visits the carvers. Their progress is measured not by the day or the week, but by the slow, painful emergence of forms from the rock. For every frieze completed, there are three abandoned: a nose chipped wrong, a foot too big, a beard that ended up resembling a nest of worms. The carvers speak of these mistakes with the detachment of doctors describing a patient lost to fever. This one died, one says, gesturing to a pile of rubble that once aspired to greatness. Most of the designs come from rough sketches delivered by scribes who understand neither the material nor the art. Sometimes a sketch shows a lion with 7 legs or a king with 3 arms. The carvers glance at these with a collective shrug. The king will have as many arms as he pays for, one mutters, and the others nod in agreement. They are not paid to dream. They are paid to carve what they are told, no more and no less. Sometimes a scribe or a minor noble will visit, eager to see their vision take shape in stone. You watch one such man, his hair too neat and his feet too clean, try to explain the curve of a horse's tail to a carver who has never seen a horse up close. The carver listens, his face blank, then turns back to his work. Later, you see him give the horse a tail that looks suspiciously like a bundle of reeds. The most skilled among them is a woman with arms as solid as oak branches and eyes that see through stone as if it were glass. She works in silence, her chisel tapping out a rhythm only she understands. Her specialty is faces, long bearded kings, scowling warriors, priests in mid prayer. Each face is the same in outline, but different in sorrow. You try to count how many she has finished this week, but the faces blur together, a parade of stoic resignation. Sometimes a carver will try to slip a joke or a personal touch into their work. A fish carved behind a lion's mane, a mouse hiding near a soldier's sandal, a smile on the lips of a servant. These are usually caught and chiseled away before anyone important notices. The overseer once caught a grinning soldier in a relief and made the carver redo the entire panel. Since then, all soldiers have lips as thin and tight as a closed fist. The work is slow and the pay is slower. Most carvers are paid not in coins, but in food, clothing, and the occasional promise of a bonus if they finish before the rains come. No one believes the promises. The oldest carver, a man with hands like driftwood, tells you he was promised a goat 10 years ago. He has seen at least 100 goats pass through the site, but none have stopped for him. By midday, the sun has turned the awning into a sauna. The carvers do not pause. If they stop, the stone grows harder, the muscles seize, and the mind wanders to places better left unexplored. Only when the call for food echoes across the site do they put down their tools, stretch aching backs, and trudge toward the gruel that tastes the same as yesterday's and will taste the same tomorrow. When dusk comes, the carvers line up their work along a low wall. The overseer passes by, glances briefly, and makes a few notations on a clay tablet. He never smiles, but neither do they. A young boy, newly arrived, asks if there will be statues of the workers someday when the city is finished. The answer comes flat and unhesitating. No one carves the likes of us. The boy does not ask again. You look at the half finished faces, the armies of stone eyes staring out at the dust. They are meant to intimidate, to inspire, to last forever. But you sense the carvers know better. They are making masks, not memories. And when the real faces have all gone, it will be hard to tell if the stone ever smiled at all. As darkness falls, you hear a song, low and mournful, rising from the carver's corner. The words are lost to you, but the feeling is clear: fatigue, resignation, and the briefest hint of defiance. You wonder if, centuries from now, someone will look at the walls of Persepolis and see only majesty. They will never know the truth that each face was shaped by hands that forgot how to hope, and by a people who learned long ago to carve away every smile before it could be noticed. You wake one morning, your nose already wrinkled in anticipation. No one warned you that Persepolis would smell like this. It is a perfume not available in any royal court, a scent not captured in the scribes' tablets or the official histories. The city being born around you exudes an aroma that is equal parts ambition and regret, with heavy notes of fatigue and something you cannot quite place, a hint of the unknowable, perhaps the very odor of hope going stale. The most obvious note in the bouquet is the dust. Dust is not just a background detail here, it is the air itself, filling lungs, eyes, and every fold of cloth. You smell it before you even open your eyes, and after a few weeks, you cannot remember what clean air is supposed to be. The dust carries with it the ghosts of 1,000 crushed stones, limestone, granite, clay, all ground together by shuffling feet, ox carts, and the passage of days that refuse to be distinguished from each other. Then there is the sweat, which never really dries. You can taste it on your lips, salty and metallic, and see it streaking the faces and arms of every worker. The scent of sweat here is the scent of effort, a sour determination that has outlasted optimism. Some workers try to mask it with herbs or the occasional dab of oil, but it is a losing battle. The summer sun ensures that every man, woman, and beast emits their own unique tribute to the empire's future glory. By midday, you walk through a fog of labor, the air thick enough to chew. Every so often, something else slips through, a sweetness, sharp and fleeting, when bundles of myrtle or mint are delivered for a priestly ritual. But the scent vanishes almost instantly, devoured by the more powerful aromas of human existence and neglect. You try to follow it once, only to end up in a tent where a priest is burning barley as an offering. The barley smoke does nothing for the smell. If anything, it adds a layer of burnt regret. The refuse piles contribute their own notes to the symphony. Food waste, left too long in the sun, turns sweet, then sickly, then simply overwhelming. The remains of animal sacrifices attract flies in biblical numbers. Once you stumble upon the pit where old sandals are discarded and almost lose consciousness at the layered stench of rotting leather, old sweat, and hopelessness. There is a stagnant pool where some of the workers wash. The water was once clear, but now is a mysterious shade, somewhere between green and gray. It smells of soap, algae, and the accumulated secrets of everyone who has tried to scrub away the day. You watch as a woman wrings out her scarf and sends another ripple of odor into the afternoon breeze. Fire has its own smell here, a smell of half-burned wood, sometimes mingled with singed hair or the accidental scorching of a tent flap. The fires are small, barely more than embers by nightfall, but their smoke clings to everything, including you. You can taste it in your mouth when you wake up and find that your hair now holds the memory of every meal cooked over a dying flame. Not all the smells are bad, strictly speaking. When the first bread comes out of the clay ovens, the aroma floats across the site, momentarily overpowering the dust and sweat. It does not last. The bread cools, hardens, and absorbs the scents around it. By the time it reaches the workers, it smells mostly of itself, a faint memory of wheat and heat, and of hands that have touched too much earth. Animals are everywhere. The donkeys, especially, make their presence known. Their droppings form a kind of aromatic calendar, marking the passage of days, the distance covered, the number of times someone forgot to clean up. Oxen, goats, the occasional stray dog all contribute, each in their own style. At night, the animals huddle together and emit a combined warmth that steams in the cool air, carrying with it every odor they have collected during the day. At times, you catch something stranger, a coppery tang when someone is cut, a bitter sharpness when a wound is cleaned, or the acrid scent of medicinal herbs being crushed for a fevered worker. You notice that the healer's tent always has a line of men outside, clutching bruised limbs or broken fingers. The inside of the tent is a confusing swirl of vinegar, blood, and hope. Over all this hovers the scent of human breath, the collective exhalation of hundreds of people resigned to repetition. Sometimes it smells of garlic or onions, sometimes of hunger, and often, when people laugh, it smells briefly of something almost pleasant, the ghost of a remembered meal or a joke shared on the wind. You realize that the city, at this stage, is not a place of glory, but of survival. It does not smell like a legend in the making. It smells like the work that comes before legend, the cost that no one will want to write about later. You have a moment of envy for the future visitors who will marvel at the stonework and the columns, but never imagine what it meant to live among the unfinished bones of Persepolis, with dust on your tongue and sweat as your only perfume. By night, the wind changes, and for a few minutes you catch the faintest hint of something else, cool, clean, almost sweet. You wonder if this is the scent of the river or merely a trick of memory. You close your eyes, try to bottle the moment, but by dawn it is gone, replaced by the city's true aroma: stone, sweat, and the ever present scent of longing for something better. You find yourself oddly comforted by the consistency. There is a truth in the air, a memory that cannot be chiseled away or washed clean. This is what history really smells like, you think. Not incense or myrtle, not the imagined fragrances of empire, but the raw and honest breath of people doing what must be done day after day until the stones are finally stacked high enough to hide the scent from those who will come after. If there is one thing the empire excels at, it is the grand project. The king's word is law, and his word has decreed that Persepolis will be more than a city. It will be a testament, a monument to the greatness of Persia, a marvel that will leave future ages speechless. And so, you find yourself at the crossroads of ambition and confusion, standing among men who have been told they are building history, though most would rather be building a wall somewhere else. The master architects arrive, their robes only slightly less dusty than everyone else's, their eyes bright with the possibility of being remembered in stone. They unroll scrolls made of brittle parchment and soft leather, and the workers gather around as if expecting a miracle. What they get, instead, is a heated debate in three languages, punctuated by sighs and dramatic pointing. The architect from Susa insists that the palace must face east, for reasons he explains with sweeping gestures. The designer from Babylon believes west is better. He cites the wind, the sun, and an ancient proverb about shadows. A third architect says nothing, just shrugs, and quietly sketches a palace facing north on his own piece of clay. You realize that every great project is, at its heart, a battle between men who have never had to dig a hole themselves. The workers stand by, waiting, as the masters argue for the better part of a day. Each time a decision seems to be reached, a wall here, a gate there, it is swiftly undone by another objection, another, what if we? Eventually, the overseer steps in, voice thick with the exhaustion of one who has seen this before. He proposes a compromise that pleases no one, and the plans are adjusted once more. The only thing everyone agrees on is that the king must not be kept waiting, although it is clear he already is. The great staircase, which will one day lead up to the audience hall, is another source of endless contention. Some say it must be wide enough for 100 men to walk side by side. Others argue for a more modest approach. The plans change so often that the ground is now scarred with half dug trenches and abandoned outlines. You watch one team of workers filling in the hole they dug just the day before, muttering about the curse of architects and the wisdom of not getting attached to any particular pit. At midday, you join the scribes as they try to record the newest version of the master plan. Their clay tablets bear layer upon layer of scratches and corrections. Some tablets are so heavy with revisions that the original text is all but illegible. A young scribe, in a rare fit of humor, draws a tiny stick figure in the margin, arms raised in despair. He wipes it away before the chief scribe can see. Despite all the grand talk of symmetry and harmony, most workers are concerned with smaller matters, where the next shipment of bricks is coming from, how many more stones must be hauled before supper, and whether today's bread will be less stale than yesterday's. For every grand vision, there are 1,000 mundane questions. How deep should this ditch be? How straight must this wall run? Is it true the king's cousin once died of sunstroke out here? The answers vary, and so does the level of enthusiasm. As the sun climbs higher, the architects retire to the shade of a tent to argue over the dimensions of the king's audience hall. They drink watered wine and fan themselves with bits of parchment. You notice that one of them has fallen asleep, mouth open, snoring gently through a lecture on the merits of imported cedar. No one seems to mind. The plans will change again tomorrow. Meanwhile, the work continues, with or without the benefit of consensus. Teams of men carry stones to places that might soon be walls, or might just as easily be moved again by morning. Others assemble scaffolding from whatever wood can be found, never certain if it will be used for a roof, a column, or simply as firewood when the night grows cold. The older workers claim they can sense which projects will last by the look in the overseer's eyes. If he frowns, it will be changed. If he sighs, it will be abandoned, one says, and you suspect he is right. Occasionally, the king's representative appears, a thin man in expensive sandals who nods approvingly at everything, offers no real suggestions, and leaves as soon as the wine runs out. His visit sparks a brief flurry of activity. Tools are polished, stones are washed, and the workers are reminded to look busy. The representative leaves with a new set of scrolls under his arm, already planning to recommend improvements at the next meeting in the capital. Boredom settles over the site like a second layer of dust. There is too much waiting, too much uncertainty. The workers grow listless. Some carve rude pictures into soft clay. Others count the clouds drifting overhead. You watch a group of men betting on whether a pile of bricks will collapse before the architect finishes his next speech. The pile holds, the speech does not. You realize, after a while, that the boredom is not an accident. It is the cost of greatness, the price paid for every change of heart, every new idea scratched onto parchment by men within it who will never lift a stone themselves. The city will rise, eventually, but only after being built and unbuilt in the minds of architects who fear being forgotten more than they fear failure. In the evenings, the workers would gather around small fires to complain about the day's indecisions. The older ones tell stories of other grand projects, some finished, most not. They laugh at the memory of a palace built upside down in Ecbatana, of a ziggurat so ambitious it was abandoned halfway up. Greatness, one man says, is mostly a matter of surviving until someone decides you are finished. You find yourself nodding. The future city, the pride of the empire, is being born in a blur of arguments and dust, shaped as much by the boredom of waiting as by the dreams of kings. You suspect that when the last stone is finally set, the greatest achievement of all will be that anyone remembers how it happened at all. It is said that every great city begins with a single stone. But what they never say, and what you learn here in Persepolis, is that greatness is made from the endless repetition of lifting, hauling, stacking, and cursing stones until your back aches and your mind is as numb as your hands. You begin your day with numbers. Not the elegant numbers the scribes carve into clay tablets, but the more brutal arithmetic of labor. How many stones must be moved? How many men are available? How many times can you bend before something breaks? The overseer announces the daily quota, his voice as flat as the surface of a finished slab. Today, 200 stones for the northern platform. No one cheers. A veteran laborer mutters, "He means 400." He is not wrong. The process is almost beautiful in its monotony. First, the stones must be located, easy enough, since they are everywhere, littering the ground like ancient regrets. Some are as small as your fist, some so large they need 6 men and a prayer to coax them into movement. You watch as ropes are tied, levers are wedged under reluctant boulders, and curses in 5 languages float across the site. The workers do not hurry. Haste leads to crushed fingers, and crushed fingers mean lost rations. Every stone must be inspected before being placed. The overseer checks for cracks and flaws with the care of a jeweler, though his patience wanes by the 50th stone. If it breaks, replace it, he says, which is as close to encouragement as anyone gets. The masons argue over which stones are worthy of the foundation and which can be hidden in the shadow of the walls. You realize quickly that there is a hierarchy even among rocks. The platform takes shape in slow layers. Each stone is laid with meticulous care, nudged into position with wooden mallets, then set with handfuls of mud and sand. The rhythm is hypnotic. Lift, carry, lower, adjust, repeat. You lose track of time as the wall rises, one stubborn block at a time. Sometimes the stones fit together perfectly, as if destined to be neighbors. More often, they resist, refusing to settle no matter how much coaxing or shouting is applied. The masons blame the stones blame the masons, and the overseer blames everyone. By midday, the sun is merciless. The air vibrates with heat, and sweat forms rivulets down every face and back. Stones become slick, and hands slip. Someone drops a slab, and it shatters. The sound is like a small defeat, and for a moment, work stops as everyone stares at the pieces. The overseer sighs, marks something on his tablet, and gestures for another stone. There are always more stones, he says, and you believe him. Lunch is eaten in the shadow of the half-finished platform. Bread, still warm but already going stale, is passed around, along with a few onions and a gourd of sour water. The men joke quietly, trading stories about impossible stones and impossible overseers. One claims to have moved a boulder the size of a bull by himself. No one believes him, but everyone laughs. A younger worker asks how many stones it takes to finish a platform. The answer comes, dry as dust, more than you can count, and never enough. The afternoon is worse. Muscles ache, tempers fray, and the work seems endless. You notice that some workers develop rituals to pass the time, touching each stone twice before lifting, humming the same few notes, or counting steps between the quarry and the platform. You try it yourself, but lose track after 117. The monotony is not just physical, it is a fog that settles over the mind. The stones become interchangeable, the hours indistinct. Occasionally, there is a moment of triumph, a stone that slides into place with a satisfying thud, a wall section that stands straight despite every prediction. The masons allow themselves a small smile, then immediately return to work. There is always another stone, another wall, another day. As the sun sets, the platform looks almost finished, though you know there is still much to be done. The workers slump against the stones they have placed, as if hoping some of the solidity will seep into their bones. The overseer makes one last circuit, tablet in hand, counting, always counting. 398, he announces. Someone groans. Another claims the count is wrong. The overseer ignores them. He scratches a final mark into the clay and disappears into his tent. You walk the length of the new platform, running your hand over the uneven surface. Each stone has its own character, rough, smooth, chipped, or pitted. You wonder how many hands have touched each one, how many stories are embedded in the cracks and corners. The stones do not answer, they have no memory, only mass. That night, you dream of stones, endless, heavy, inescapable. They tumble from the sky, rise from the ground, block every path. You wake before dawn, your body sore, your mind already calculating the day's quota. How many stones does it take to build a city? How many stones does it take to forget you were ever anything but a pair of hands and a tired back? You do not know the answer. No one does. All you know is that tomorrow there will be more stones, more walls, and more counting. The platform will rise, and with it, the certainty that every great city is built on the exhaustion of those who never get to rest. You could be forgiven for thinking that the most precious thing in Persepolis is stone, given the number of boulders, bricks, and slabs that clutter every corner of the construction site. But by your second month, you realize the truth. The empire's future rises and falls not on marble and granite, but on water, cold, muddy, elusive water that slips through fingers and cracks with a sly indifference. Water is not just scarce here, it is legendary. Every morning begins with the same ritual. Workers gather at the edge of a meager stream that dares to call itself a river, clutching battered jars, pails, and buckets woven from reeds. The queue is already long before the sun rises, a line of silent, bleary eyed figures, each staring at the back of the person in front of them and calculating how much liquid will be left when their turn finally comes. You soon learn that the water always runs out, but the line never does. The great minds behind Persepolis, not content with waiting on rivers and rain, have devised a plan as ambitious as the city itself. We will bring the water to us, announces the royal engineer, whose sandals are cleaner than any you have seen in weeks. He gestures at a rough map scratched into the dust, tracing the imagined course of an aqueduct with his staff. Here, from the hills, straight to the heart of the city, his voice rings with the conviction of a man who has never carried a bucket in his life. You watch as the plan unfolds in slow motion. First, a scouting party is sent to the hills, returning with stories of springs that may or may not exist, guarded by sheep, rocks, and the occasional shepherd with strong opinions. Next, a team of surveyors paces out the proposed route, arguing over gradients, soil, and what exactly constitutes downhill. They drive wooden stakes into the earth at intervals, marking a line that seems to wander more than march. Then comes the digging. 500 men, chosen for their strength, their debts, or simply their inability to say no, are set to work with shovels, picks, and baskets. The ground is stubborn, the sun pitiless. You see men pass out from heat and thirst within the first hour. Still, the overseer marks their names on his tablet and replaces them with others. There are always more workers, and the ditch grows longer by the day, although never quite as straight as the engineer's map promised. The first sections of the aqueduct are nothing more than shallow ditches lined with stones. Progress is measured in cubits and curses. Every so often, a supervisor inspects the trench, declares it too narrow or too deep, and demands it be redone. It must flow, he intones, or all this is for nothing. The workers nod, not because they agree, but because it is safer to nod than to argue. The next phase is even more ambitious. Clay pipes, fired in smoky kilns, are to be fitted together and laid along the trench. You watch as a caravan of donkeys arrives, each burdened with lengths of pipe that clink and rattle ominously. The pipes are fragile, breaking at the slightest provocation. Some are cracked before they even reach the ditch. Others are dropped accidentally or otherwise, in the hope that the day will end sooner. Fitting the pipes together is a job for the patient, and patience is in short supply. The workers crouch in the heat, slathering the joints with a mixture of mud and straw that is meant to keep the water in and the snakes out. You notice that the latter is more successful than the former. Once, a pipe bursts during a test, sending a muddy spray over 3 supervisors and half a dozen scribes. The laughter is brief, the punishment less so. At the far end of the trench, near the stream, a primitive gate is constructed, a slab of stone propped up with wooden wedges and sealed with yet more mud. The idea is simple: lift the gate, let the water in, and hope it reaches the other end before vanishing into the thirsty ground. The first attempt is a disaster. The water trickles, hesitates, and disappears halfway, leaving the rest of the trench as dry as before. The engineer blames the workers. The workers blame the pipes. Everyone blames the sun. There is talk of miracles, of digging deeper, of offering sacrifices to the river gods. A priest is called, and after an hour of muttered prayers and generous offerings of barley, he pronounces the project likely, with continued faith and effort. No one is reassured, but work resumes anyway. Every few days, a small success is celebrated. A trickle of water appears at the edge of the city, enough to fill a jar or two. The workers drink quickly, knowing it may be their last taste until the next rain. You begin to realize that bringing water to Persepolis is less an act of heroism than a monument to absurdity. The effort expended, the number of hands blistered, the volume of clay shattered, the length of ditches dug, seems out of all proportion to the muddy puddles that result. Yet still they try, day after day, a ritual as stubborn as the stones they stack for the palace. At night, by the dim glow of firelight, you hear the men joking about the aqueduct. One says that if the water ever reaches the city, it will turn to wine out of sheer relief. Another claims to have seen a fish in the trench, a clear sign of madness, since the only fish in Persepolis are in the imaginations of men too tired to care about the truth. The jokes are weak, but the laughter is real, if only because there is nothing else to do. One evening, the royal engineer visits the trench, his sandals now almost as filthy as everyone else's. He stares at the slow seepage of water and shakes his head. One day, he says. They will thank us for this. No one replies. It is easier to pretend not to hear. By dawn, the water has disappeared again. The workers rise, shoulders heavy, and take up their shovels. The city needs water, and so the ditches grow longer, the pipes are patched, and the hope, fragile as a clay pipe, persists for one more day. You think, watching all this, that maybe greatness is not in the palace, or the columns, or the armies, but in the simple, relentless refusal to give up, even when common sense says you should have stopped digging a long time ago. When the sun disappears and the endless dust finally settles, Persepolis does not become quieter. It merely becomes different. The grand plans and stone hauling are replaced by smaller, slower routines. The simmer of gruel over scattered fires, the shuffle of tired bodies searching for a patch of ground soft enough to call a bed, and the nightly chorus of complaints that begins in whispers and ends, usually in resignation. You learn quickly that the camp is not a place for dreams. It is a place for survival. The tents, if they can be called that, are a patchwork of woven mats, battered hides, and bits of discarded cloth. Wind tugs at the seams and rattles loose stakes. Every night, something collapses, usually a tent, occasionally a spirit. The lucky workers sleep in clusters, back to back for warmth. The less lucky find whatever shelter remains behind stone piles, beneath carts, or under the half built scaffolding. Food is an event of its own. Each evening, the overseer's assistants arrive with baskets of rations, guarded as fiercely as gold. The meal is always the same: thin, gray gruel that clings to the bowl like remorse, punctuated by hard bread that could easily double as a weapon. On rare nights, someone produces an onion, a fig, or even a strip of salted meat, treasures that vanish instantly. No one wastes time on formalities. Elbows fly, bowls clatter, and every drop is scraped clean. After the meal, there are no banquets, only the slow and universal business of finding enough energy to keep living until morning. You discover that, contrary to legend, hunger does not always unite people. It draws lines, sharp and cruel, between those who have something to trade and those who do not. Bread is currency. A handful of dates can buy loyalty for an hour. A swig of wine can buy a story, and the promise of extra gruel is as effective as any royal decree. The old and the young, the weak and the strong, all learn to barter in whatever language they possess. The evenings are colder than you expect, and sleep is a privilege, not a guarantee. The lucky drift off to the dull rhythm of snores and soft curses. Others toss restlessly, scratching at bites from invisible insects or listening for the small, persistent scurry of mice and rats. Someone always cries out in the night, whether from nightmare, pain, or the simple shock of waking to find oneself still here. You cannot always tell. Yet in the thick of exhaustion, conversation somehow survives. The topics are as predictable as the rations. How long until the king visits, when the rains might come, whether anyone has ever died of boredom, and why the stones must be moved again tomorrow. Some workers share jokes, though most are too tired for laughter. The younger ones boast about feats of strength or imagined escapades in the city that will one day exist. The older ones offer warnings, disguised as stories, about the dangers of ambition and the folly of arguing with anyone in a tunic finer than your own. Now and then, conversation veers into dangerous territory. Talk of escape, rebellion, or the wish that a great flood might simply sweep the whole city away. These moments end quickly, usually with a glance over the shoulder or a sharp word from a more cautious neighbor. The overseers are always listening, and rumors are as valuable as bread. The camp is not without its moments of fragile joy. Someone hums a lullaby remembered from another land. A group of children chase each other around a pile of rubble, shrieking with laughter until a scribe yells at them to stop. There are lovers too, though always in secret, always with an eye on the shadows. One night, you witness a small wedding, two workers exchanging tokens of string and whispered promises while their friends keep watch. The ceremony lasts less than a minute, but the memory lingers, soft and stubborn as the hope that grows in impossible places. Illness is a constant threat. Fevers spread through the camp like rumors, and healers are few. When someone falls sick, a collection is made for herbs or prayers, or both. Most recover, a few do not, and the overseer adds their names to a tablet with the same weary efficiency he uses to count stones. The dead are buried quickly in shallow graves just beyond the camp, marked by nothing but a pile of smaller stones and a fading memory. There is a rhythm to life here, a cycle of hunger and exhaustion, work and waiting, misery, and the smallest moments of defiance. In the mornings, the camp stirs before dawn, workers rising with stiff limbs and heavier hearts. Someone always manages to find something to grumble about, which is how you know the day has truly begun. You realize, watching all this, that Persepolis is not being built only by hands and backs, but by the silent endurance of those who never chose to be here and have no choice but to stay. Their names will not be carved into stone or remembered in song. Their complaints will not reach the king, but every wall and platform is filled with the echo of their lives, quiet, unremarkable, and utterly indispensable. As the fires burn low and the camp finally surrenders to sleep, you wonder which will last longer, the city they are building, or the knowledge of how it really felt to live at its edge, where survival itself is an act of quiet, daily rebellion. If you thought the construction of Persepolis was a matter for strong backs and sharper stones, you are soon disabused of this notion by the endless parade of priests who seem to outnumber both bricks and sense. For every task, it appears, there is a ritual, for every problem, a prayer, and for every misfortune, a scapegoat, sometimes quite literally. You notice first the smell, not the sweat and dust of the workers, but the pungent scent of burning herbs and animal fat. It drifts from the sacred tent, a space cordoned off by ropes and decorated with banners that catch the sun in dazzling, unnecessary ways. The priests move through the site in carefully orchestrated steps, robes trailing in the dirt, faces set in expressions of calculated solemnity. It is an odd theater, performed for an audience too tired to care. Work begins only after the morning ritual, an elaborate dance involving water, fire, barley, and the occasional unlucky bird. You stand in line with the workers as a priest splashes a handful of purified water in your direction, murmuring blessings in Old Persian. The water is always gritty, the words always too quiet to understand, but everyone knows to bow their heads and feign reverence. The overseer, never one to waste time, mutters prayers under his breath and pushes workers forward, grumbling that every minute spent praying is a minute not spent building. Whenever a new section of wall is started, the priests gather to anoint the foundation with a mixture of oil, honey, and ashes. The ritual is meant to bind the structure to the favor of the gods and to remind the workers that every stone set out of place might bring a curse down upon them and their descendants. The effect is a work site full of men nervously eyeing every crooked block, crossing themselves in three different traditions just in case. You soon learn that certain tools must also be blessed. Hammers, chisels, ropes, and even the overseer's tablet receive a thin coating of sacred oil at the start of each week. The oil stains everything it touches, making it difficult to grip anything for hours. Some believe the priests do this deliberately, as a subtle test of piety and patience. Others just curse and wipe their hands on their tunics when no one is looking. Animal sacrifice is the most dramatic of the rituals. Sheep and goats, brought in on festival days, are paraded around the foundation while the workers look on with expressions that range from hungry anticipation to faint disgust. The priests chant, wave their hands, and spill the blood at the four corners of the site. The smell is unmistakable and lingers for days, drawing flies in numbers that no ritual can dispel. You note that the priests are always careful to collect the best cuts of meat for themselves, leaving the rest for the workers, who gnaw the bones with grim determination. There is a special ceremony for the arrival of rare stones. Whenever a particularly massive or unusual block is hauled in, the priests appear with extra incense and more elaborate prayers. They circle the stone, sprinkle it with wine, and whisper secrets into the cracks. The workers watch, unimpressed, then proceed to move the stone with the same grunts and groans as every other. Later, when the priests are gone, you hear a few men joking about which god cares about which rock. The consensus is that the gods must have very strange tastes. If an accident occurs, a stone falls, a wall collapses, or a man is injured, the response is always the same: more rituals, more offerings, more blame assigned to the invisible forces that stalk the site. The priests move quickly to re-establish order, dousing the area with more blessed water, sacrificing an extra bird, and reciting twice as many prayers. You suspect that the only thing growing faster than the walls of Persepolis is the number of animals required to keep the priests satisfied. Even the daily food rations are subject to ritual scrutiny. Each cauldron of gruel is blessed before it can be served, and the first scoop is always set aside as an offering. This scoop is then carried to a small altar on the edge of the camp, where it is left for the spirits. Later, you see the same scoop being quietly retrieved and eaten by one of the bolder children. Whether this counts as sacrilege or simply recycling depends on who is telling the story. The priests are not all the same. Some are genuine believers, their eyes shining with the conviction that every prayer truly matters, that every stone is watched by unseen forces. Others are more pragmatic, content to perform the rituals with the minimal necessary drama, collecting their share of offerings and gossiping about the overseer's failings. You hear rumors that a few priests keep detailed lists, not of sins, but of bribes. Once you attend an evening ritual by invitation. The priests chant in a circle of torches, their voices rising and falling in a language older than the city itself. The workers stand around the perimeter, some awed, most simply grateful for a break from lifting stones. The ritual lasts well into the night, punctuated by the distant howl of jackals and the closer grumble of empty stomachs. You realize, in the end, that the rituals serve many purposes. They placate the fearful, delay the impatient, and justify the endless repetition that is the heart of all construction. Above all, they remind everyone, workers, overseers, and priests alike, that the fate of Persepolis depends as much on unseen hands as on those calloused and bleeding ones you see every day. By the time the last torch burns out and the priests withdraw to their tent, the site is once again just a field of dust and half-built dreams. Tomorrow, there will be more prayers, more sacrifices, and more reminders that, in Persepolis, even the gods must work overtime. You have grown accustomed to dryness, to the way dust invades every pore, every bowl of gruel, every hour of work. The sun, constant and pitiless, has become a familiar adversary, always winning. And so, when the sky begins to darken one afternoon, you, along with the rest of Persepolis, look up with a mixture of suspicion, hope, and dread. It starts slowly, with a faint smell in the air that is not quite dust, not quite smoke, but something sharp and wild. Children are the first to notice, pointing at the darkening edge of the horizon, their voices high with both excitement and warning. The adults look skyward, uncertain. The priests murmur prayers out of habit, their words tumbling over one another, trying to decide if this is a blessing or a curse. The first drops are tentative, as if the rain is afraid to disturb such determined dryness. They leave dark marks on stone, on tents, on tired faces. You watch a worker hold out his hand, palm up, and laugh when he feels the cold touch. Others join in, shuffling forward to feel what has become, for a few moments, a miracle. For a brief and fragile instant, the city forgets its purpose. No one lifts a stone, no one shouts, no one writes on a clay tablet, There is only the rain. Then, without warning, the clouds decide that enough caution has been shown. The sky opens and water falls in a torrent, 1,000 times more than the aqueduct has managed in months. The camp erupts into confusion. Workers rush to gather belongings, to shelter under half built scaffolding, to save tools, to rescue what can be rescued. Tents collapse in moments, turning instantly from meager shelter to sodden traps. The few with proper cloaks become minor gods. Everyone else is drenched to the bone. The dust, which once seemed eternal, vanishes in the face of so much water. The earth, so stubborn and unyielding, transforms instantly into mud, a sucking, slippery substance that devours sandals, buckets, and any dignity you thought you had left. The trenches dug for the aqueduct fill and overflow, carving new paths through the camp, carrying away straw, scraps of bread, and someone's carefully hoarded shoes. The workers, unable to move, laugh or curse or both as the sight dissolves into chaos. For the overseer, the rain is a disaster. He runs from tent to trench, shouting instructions that are quickly drowned out by the drumming of water on canvas and stone. His precious clay tablets are ruined, the careful records blurring into unreadable streaks. You watch him stare at a disintegrating list of workers, his mouth twisted in a snarl, and you realize that no amount of bureaucracy can stop a determined rain. The stone carvers, for once, seem almost happy. Rainwater washes the dust from their work, revealing clean lines and sharp reliefs. For a moment, their faces almost soften. A boy dances atop a pile of stones, arms raised, as if he alone has summoned the storm. The masons, however, watch in horror as carefully placed blocks begin to shift and slide, their work of days undone in an afternoon. Not everyone suffers. The youngest workers turn the mud into a playground, sliding and shrieking with laughter. Some adults join in, if only to remember what it felt like to play, if only to spite the overseer and the priests. You see two women wade into the deepest puddle to rescue a goat, and then, for no reason at all, start splashing each other until they are both covered in mud from head to foot. The priests, caught in the open, attempt to turn the deluge into a divine omen. One proclaims that the rain is proof of the gods' favor. Another insists it is punishment for some forgotten ritual gone wrong. A third simply stands under an awning and waits it out, unwilling to risk his sacred robes for a sermon no one is listening to. When the rain fails to stop on command, the priests fall silent, their authority washed as thin as their patience. As the afternoon wanes, the rain slows, then ceases. The sight is unrecognizable. What was once a field of dust and orderly progress is now a swamp of half-drowned hopes and half-buried stones. Workers pick through the mud, searching for tools, sandals, lost baskets, and the remnants of their daily rations. The overseer stands in the middle of the chaos, water dripping from his hair and tunic, staring at the sky with a look that is equal parts fury and surrender. Yet, as the sky clears and a pale sun struggles through the clouds, something like joy lingers in the air. The mud will dry, the stones will be restacked, the records will be rewritten, or, more likely, forgotten. But for one afternoon, the city was washed clean, the monotony broken, and even the most tired workers remembered how to laugh. That night, as the camp settles in with wet blankets and damp bread, the stories begin. Some say the rain was a sign of coming prosperity. Others insist it is the start of a curse. The children tell tales of mud monsters and rivers of chocolate. The stone carvers joke about carving new faces for the gods, faces that look like drowned rats. You fall asleep to the sound of water dripping from the eaves, and for the first time in weeks, you dream not of dust or stones, but of rain, impossible, wonderful, and gone before you could quite believe it was real. As the mud dries and the broken tents are patched, the city returns to its usual rhythm, if repetition can be called rhythm. Now, with the first stones set and the outlines of palaces and halls visible even through dust and exhaustion, something changes in the air. Not hope, not pride, but a prickling awareness that what is rising here will not belong to those whose hands shape it. The word travels fast, carried by rumor and the occasional scribe's careless remark. The king will come, not now, and probably not soon, but someday. It is the kind of promise that makes foremen stand a little straighter and workers keep their heads down. The city, you are told, is being built for His Majesty, the Shahanshah, King of Kings, Lord of the four corners of the world, whose shadow alone is said to make grass grow and enemies tremble. Yet as the walls rise, you see where the king's city ends and the people's city fails to begin. The central plan is a study in symmetry, vast open courtyards, ceremonial staircases, processional avenues wide enough for armies, and terraces so broad you could lose a village upon them. The plans are spoken of in reverent tones. The Apadana, a hall that will hold 1,000 nobles. The gate of all nations, where envoys from distant lands will bow to the might of Persia. The royal treasury, where gold and tribute will be counted in. The shade, but for the workers and the families who live in the shadow of these ambitions, there is no plan, only improvisation. The labor camp sprawls without design, its tents and lean-tos inching ever further from the heart of the construction site. No architect draws their alleys. No scribe records their complaints. You watch a group of women dragging a length of old cloth between two stone piles, creating a makeshift shelter from the noon sun. A boy scrawls a game board into the dust, using bits of pottery for pieces. The only place for shade is wherever someone taller than you is willing to stand. When the king's envoys come to inspect, they glide past the camp without looking. The overseer trails behind, eyes fixed firmly on the future, which for him means the next royal inspection and a chance, perhaps, for advancement or at least survival. He asks the workers to stay out of sight, to keep the fires low, to make the camp look orderly, as if dignity could be arranged out of nothing but hunger and tired bodies. There is talk, always whispered, of what will happen when the city is finished. Some believe they will be allowed to stay, to live in the shade of the palaces and eat crumbs from the royal feasts. Others, older and less inclined to believe in miracles, say that when the last stone is set, the camp will be swept away as surely as the dust after a storm. A city for the king, not for us, an old woman mutters, her fingers knotted with years of work. We build, we leave, and our names disappear. The supervisors do not disagree, but they are too busy measuring columns and counting bricks to say it out loud. They are caught in their own middle ground, not noble enough for the palaces, not broken enough for the camp. At night, you sometimes see one or two sharing a quiet meal with the workers, their voices softer, their stories sadder. The overseer, for all his grim authority, is not welcome in either world. The only truly public spaces planned are the processional routes, the wide roads meant for parades and ceremonies, where the king will be seen once a year by those lucky or foolish enough to crowd near the gates. You hear that shade trees will be planted along the main avenues, but the trees arrive dead or die soon after planting, and the workers joke that only ghosts will ever walk comfortably here. No one designs water wells or market stalls for the workers. If a tent collapses, it is mended. If a child falls ill, prayers are offered. When the rain comes, as it did, the city's drainage is measured only by how quickly it can be forgotten. No plans exist for a school, nor a place to bury the dead, except the anonymous graves just beyond the stones. You hear stories from new arrivals, cities where the people live within the walls, where markets buzz and children race beneath balconies. In Persepolis, there will be no children's laughter in the palace courts, no baskets of fruit beside the carved lions. Even the shadows here are reserved for greatness, for those whose names already fill the tablets. The best the workers can hope for is a piece of broken pottery to drink from and a place in the sun where the wind does not cut too sharply. The city grows, but it does not become more human. It becomes more ceremonial, more distant, more the domain of kings and of memory. The people who build it learn to look past the shining stones and see only the next meal, the next shift, the next chance to rest their heads. At sunset, you wander from the heart of the site to the edge of the camp, watching the last light slide off the top of an unfinished column. For a moment, the city seems almost beautiful, as if the dreams of those who planned it were enough to fill the empty spaces. Then the wind changes, and you are reminded that here, the city is not for you. It is for the king, and for the kings who will come after, and for the history that will mention neither the woman stitching a torn tent, nor the boy carving games into the dust. The stars rise, as indifferent as ever. Tomorrow will be another day of building, another day of being reminded whose city this truly is. If you thought the foundation of Persepolis was stone and sweat, you would not be wrong, but you would be forgetting the silent multitude who bear just as much weight as any laborer, the animals. They are everywhere, woven into the city's beginnings like threads in a fraying tapestry. Donkeys and oxen outnumber engineers. The slow, steady clop of hooves, the creak of worn wooden harnesses, the exhausted snort of a beast after a long haul, these are the true sounds of the empire's rise. At dawn, while the workers rub sleep from their eyes, the animals are already at their work. Donkeys, small and stubborn, line up alongside wagons stacked with bricks, baskets, and sometimes a hopeful child trying to steal a ride. Oxen, broad backed and eternally resigned, heave at ropes and poles, dragging sledges loaded with stones too heavy for any group of men to manage alone. Their pace is unhurried, their eyes distant, as if they have already seen every city rise and fall and know how little any of it will matter. You learn to recognize individuals. There is a donkey with one torn ear who will not move unless a certain song is sung. An ox with a white blaze on its nose is famous for breaking ropes at the worst possible moment. Some of the animals, you are told, have crossed half the empire to be here, led by men who will never go back home. When a new batch arrives, shaggy ponies from the mountains, camels from distant deserts, they are greeted not with celebration, but with weary appraisal. Will they pull? Will they bite? Will they last through the summer? The keepers, a class apart, live their own lives on the edge of the camp. They speak more to their charges than to the other workers, murmuring instructions and small comforts in languages that change from tent to tent. The keepers know every limp, every cough, every stubborn refusal to move. They patch harnesses with strips of old tunic, mix feed from whatever scraps they can beg or barter, and nurse their animals through fevers that take more than a few away in the night. The animals eat little and are asked for much. Feed is whatever can be scavenged: dry grass, wilted leaves, kitchen waste. When there is not enough, the donkeys nibble at ropes, the oxen chew old thatch, and everyone pretends not to notice. The beasts' ribs show beneath their dusty hides, and their coats become patchy. But every morning they rise and walk to the harness as if it is the most natural thing in the world. The keepers stroke tired necks and promise rest that will never come. If an animal falters, it becomes a crisis. A wagon stuck in the mud is a matter of minutes. A dead donkey is a day lost, and a dead ox, well, you see the overseer's jaw tighten at the thought. The priests are called to bless the carcass, a perfunctory ritual that serves mostly to keep the flies away until the butchers arrive. Nothing is wasted, but the loss is keenly felt. Children watch from a distance, half horrified, half hungry. Someone carves a mark on a post, the only memorial these workers' companions ever receive. Some days the animals are loaned out to other teams. The favored ox or the most reliable donkey traded like coins between foremen. It is a quiet bartering system governed by debts and favors, rarely acknowledged, but fiercely enforced. The best animals earn their keepers small privileges, a better patch of shade, a thicker blanket, the promise of a share in tomorrow's bread. Occasionally, a beast escapes. Once, you watch a pair of donkeys bolt from a broken pen, careening through the camp with two children clinging to their backs, scattering tools and laughter in equal measure. It takes the better part of an hour to catch them. When they are returned, the children are scolded and the donkeys are given an extra handful of feed, both as a reward and as an apology. There is little sentimentality. No one names the oxen, not really, though nicknames are whispered in the dusk. The animals are admired for their strength and pitied for their burdens, but affection is a luxury few can afford. Still, you see small kindnesses. A child weaving a flower into a donkey's mane, a keeper sharing a crust of bread with his favorite mule, an old woman rubbing salve onto a wounded flank. These moments pass without comment, noticed only by those who have learned to look for mercy in places where it is rare. The priests, as always, have their part to play. At the start of each month, they pass among the animals, sprinkling them with water and muttering prayers for health and endurance. The animals endure the ceremony with stoic patience, eyes half lidded, unmoved by promises of divine favor. If the gods are watching, they offer no sign. By late afternoon, the animals move more slowly, their loads heavier, their heads lower. You watch as a sledge overturns, spilling a precious block of carved stone into the dust. The donkey pulling it stands perfectly still, as if pondering the point of it all. The workers curse and scramble to set things right, but the donkey does not move until a familiar hand scratches its ear and a tired voice offers reassurance. Then, with a resigned snort, the work resumes. At dusk, the animals are finally unhitched. They stand in the fading light, sides heaving, flanks streaked with mud and sweat. Some lie down at once, others wander to the water trough, where they drink slowly, as if every drop must be remembered. The keepers gather for one last inspection, checking hooves and harnesses, murmuring to the beasts as if confessing secrets. That night, you listen to the low sounds of animals breathing and shifting in the dark, the quiet heart of a city that does not yet exist. The stone, the palaces, the grand avenues, none of it would rise without these silent laborers, and none of it will remember them. When the histories of Persepolis are written, there will be lists of kings and architects, but not a single word for the ox who pulled stones until his heart failed, or the donkey whose patience outlasted every overseer. But tonight, as you walk between the wagons and pens, you offer your own private prayer, one of thanks, perhaps, or simply of recognition. Without these weary animals, there would be nothing to build and no one to remember the cost. There are moments in the construction of Persepolis that are supposed to dazzle even the most indifferent observer, moments when the city rises not just in inches, but in ambition. None is more anticipated or more feared than the day the first column is lifted upright. All the talk of kings and gods, All the rituals and arguments about symmetry have been leading to this: a single cylinder of stone that is meant to defy the Earth's stubborn refusal to let go. You hear the news before dawn. Today, we raise the first column. The message ripples through the camp, inspiring a mix of dread, skepticism, and the brief hope that something interesting might actually happen. The workers gather, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes, others tightening belts around sore backs. The overseer stalks among them, his tablet heavy with names and warnings. He reads out the teams assigned to the lifting, each name greeted by a chorus of groans, or occasionally an anxious silence. The column itself is a marvel, at least, that is how it appears to the architects and priests who stand around it, hands folded and expressions grave. It is longer than two men laid end to end, and thicker than the strongest ox. The stone is veined with traces of gold and rust, scars of the journey from a distant quarry. It lies on the ground like a fallen tree, waiting to be coaxed upright by strength and ingenuity. Ropes are checked and rechecked. Wooden frames creak under the strain as workers drive wedges into the earth. The royal engineer oversees the operation, issuing instructions that are translated into 4 languages and immediately misunderstood in 5. Everyone has an opinion on how best to raise the column, but no one wants to take responsibility when the time comes. The lifting begins with a ritual. Of course it does. Priests walk the length of the column, sprinkling oil and muttering invocations to every god whose jurisdiction might possibly include heavy lifting. An offering of barley is thrown to the earth. A sheep, none too pleased, is paraded around the site before being led away to its fate. The workers wait, shifting from foot to foot, eyes darting between the column and the sky. Finally, the signal is given. 70 men, roped together like beads on a broken string, brace themselves and pull in unison. The column groans and shifts, wooden supports snap. Somewhere, a man yells. The column rises by an inch, then stops, unmoved by further pleading. Another team joins in, ropes straining, faces red and arms trembling. A song starts up, a half-hearted chant meant to keep the rhythm, but it quickly dissolves into shouts and curses. An hour passes, then another. The column shudders, lifts, then settles back with a thud that rattles the ground. Blisters open on palms, and shoulders ache. Someone stumbles and is pulled upright by his neighbor. The overseer stalks back and forth, barking orders, his own anxiety hidden beneath a mask of impatience. The royal engineer consults his scrolls and makes another adjustment, convinced the laws of leverage are subject to persuasion. As the sun climbs, the lifting becomes a battle of endurance. The workers rotate, each group lasting only as long as their strength holds out. The column moves a little higher, now at an angle that seems both promising and dangerous. Supports are wedged beneath it, and everyone holds their breath. If it falls, the damage will be more than broken stone. It will be a story told in the camp for years, a warning about pride and physics. It happens slowly, then all at once. With one final, desperate heave, the column tips into place. The ropes go slack, and for a moment, no one moves, afraid to trust their eyes. Then the cheer goes up, not loud or joyous, but deep and exhausted. The priests hurry forward to anoint the base with oil, to claim the credit for divine intervention. The royal engineer wipes his brow and tries to look dignified as he inspects the column, already plotting improvements for the next attempt. The workers, meanwhile, collapse in the shade, breathing hard, their faces streaked with sweat and dust. A man examines his hands and finds blisters torn open, skin red and raw. Another rolls his shoulders, wincing at the familiar ache that signals tomorrow's pain. Someone jokes, if the king wants 100 columns, let him lift the next one himself. Laughter flickers, brief and bitter, and then is gone. The overseer makes his round, checking the damage. 3 men are sent to the healer's tent, backs twisted and knees swollen. The rest are given a longer break, not out of mercy, but because another column will not be ready until the evening. You watch as the men doze in the dust, their bodies shaped by labor, their dreams simple and short. The column, now upright, casts a long shadow. The architects study it, measuring and muttering, already worrying about imperfections invisible to anyone but themselves. The priests leave a bundle of incense at the base and move on to other duties. By sunset, the first column is just another part of the city, no longer a marvel, just an expectation. That night, as the workers eat their meager supper, the column stands alone against the sky, silent witness to the cost of every ambition. The talk is not of glory or divine favor, but of pain. Backs that may never straighten, hands that may never heal, men who might not return for the second column or the third. Yet the city will demand them, and so they will return again and again until the skyline of Persepolis bristles with the bones of the tired. You walk past the column, feeling the night air settle in, and wonder how many more will be raised before anyone thinks to ask if the price is worth it. You suspect the answer will be written not in clay or stone, but in scars and stories passed down in the darkness long after the city itself has forgotten the names of those who built it. If the dust of Persepolis carries anything more persistent than the smell of sweat, it is rumor. News does not travel here so much as seep, slowly, uncertainly, like water through cracked clay. There is always a story making the rounds, a new edict from the capital, a visiting noble, a miracle, a disaster. But lately, the most persistent rumors concern the future, both its glory and its curse. It begins innocently, as so many things do. At the midday break, a group of workers cluster in the scant shade of a half-built wall. Someone claims to have overheard a foreman whispering to a scribe. In 200 years, they say, strangers will come from the west, barbarians who eat cheese with every meal, and they will burn it all to the ground. The others laugh, but uneasily. There is something about the certainty of the future's destruction that fits the mood of the camp. You notice that even the older men, those who have seen more projects abandoned than finished, are quiet for a moment. The talk turns, as it often does, to glory. The city will be the envy of all nations, says one man, grander than Babylon, richer than Susa, more eternal than the sun. Messengers from distant lands will travel for months just to marvel at the gates and columns, their mouths hanging open like fish. Another worker, less easily impressed, asks what good that will do anyone who sleeps in the dirt outside those shining walls. Someone else jokes that maybe one day they will build a city just for workers, with soft beds, sweet wine, and all the shade you could want. The laughter that follows is loudest from those who know better. The rumors grow bolder as dusk settles. The king, it is said, plans to visit the site himself, perhaps bringing gold, or more likely, demands for more columns, more gates, more impossible feats. Others claim the king's mother has sent prayers for the workers' health, or at least for fewer accidents that might embarrass the family. A few even say that the gods themselves will descend to inspect the foundations, disguised as tired travelers. For once, no one glances at the priests to see if this might be true. The priests are too busy arguing over the division of sacrificial meat to notice. Some rumors are darker. It is whispered that if the city is not finished by a certain date, a date that shifts with each retelling, the overseers will pick men at random and bury them beneath the foundations to appease the spirits. The youngest workers sleep badly after hearing this, eyeing every new trench with suspicion. The older ones simply shrug. If the stones want company, let them have it, says a mason whose hands shake after every shift. But it is the rumor of endless labor that sticks in your mind. There are stories, passed from group to group, that the city will never be finished, that every time a hall is completed, a new wing will be ordered, that every time the last column rises, a new platform will be drawn on a scribe's tablet. Some workers say they dream of building the same wall over and over, each time waking to find it half undone, the stones just as heavy, their backs just as sore. You begin to suspect this is less a dream and more a prophecy. You hear a foreman mutter, "The king does not want a city, he wants a story." Someone else adds, "A story with no ending." There is a grim comfort in the idea. If the work never ends, perhaps neither do you. Perhaps your sweat, your pain, your days all blend into the mortar of legend. Or perhaps, more likely, you are simply forgotten, a line scratched out in a broken ledger. One evening, the workers gather around a rare fire and share what they have heard. There is talk of a festival planned for the day the city is finished, a feast, games, maybe even freedom for the best laborers. The scribe who records these promises is careful to leave space, knowing the words will be erased and replaced before anyone eats so much as an extra loaf of bread. A traveler passing through the camp tells a different kind of story. He claims to have seen cities built in a single season and abandoned just as quickly, their palaces haunted by dogs and ghosts. Stone remembers nothing, he says, but stories linger. The workers listen, some scoffing, some silent. It is a cold comfort, but sometimes that is enough. Of course, there is always someone who insists that none of it matters, that when the last stone is set, the king will forget the names of everyone who built it. That history belongs to those who carve their names in bigger letters than anyone else. You watch the youngest boy in the camp scratch his name into the base of a column, small and crooked, quickly wiped away by a supervisor. Even so, the boy smiles. For a moment, his story exists. The rumors never quite fade. Each day brings new whispers, new predictions of greatness and doom. The camp is built on them as much as on mud and straw. You wonder sometimes what you will say if you ever leave this place. Will you remember the stones, the columns, the rumors, or just the endless days when the future seemed both impossibly distant and always about to arrive? The fire dies, the laughter fades, and you return to your blanket beneath the stars. Overhead, the sky is vast and silent, unmoved by the dreams and fears of men who are just a passing through. Tomorrow will bring more work, more stories, and the certainty that the future, whatever it brings, will arrive one stone at a time. At Persepolis, time is measured not by sun or stars, but by the demands of stone and the ache of muscle. The days stretch and shrink according to someone else's idea of progress, marked by the endless repetition of tasks that only occasionally resemble progress at all. If you are searching for glory, you will not find it here. If you are searching for routine, there is enough to last 100 lifetimes. Dawn arrives with little ceremony. The horizon turns from black to blue, and with it, the first shouts ripple through the camp. Sleep is a shallow, unreliable friend. You wake already tired, still half lost in dreams of walls that never stand straight, or fields with nothing to lift. The first light shows bodies rising from wherever they collapsed, bundled against the cold, rubbing stiffness from their joints and sand from their eyes. Someone coughs, someone else curses. Everyone moves as if the weight of the coming day is already tied to their ankles. The overseer arrives with his tablet and his list. He counts, always counts, how many men are standing, how many women, how many children old enough to carry water or sweep the site. Names are called, absences noted, excuses offered and mostly ignored. The unlucky are assigned to the quarry or the mud pits. The lucky, if such a word can exist here, haul smaller stones, mix mortar, or repair tools. The skilled laborers are set to carving or fitting, the strong to lifting, and the desperate to anything at all. You begin your day with a stone, or a shovel, or a bucket. You do not choose, the work chooses you. The first hour passes in silence, broken only by the scrape of stone against stone, the splash of water in a cracked trough, the mutter of private prayers. The sun climbs higher, and the work becomes mechanical. Lift, carry, drop, repeat. If you are wise, you find ways to conserve strength, rolling stones instead of lifting, sharing loads with a neighbor, bribing a supervisor with a half rotten date to be allowed one more rest. The meals are predictable: a handful of gruel at sunrise, a wedge of bread if you are lucky, a few sips of water that taste of clay and old hopes. Eating is done quickly, often while standing, always while keeping an eye on the overseer's progress. Some workers joke that the fastest way to lose a meal is to look too hungry. Midday is the hardest. The sun is a hammer. Shadows shrink until there is nowhere to hide. Some workers slip away to nap beneath carts or scaffolding, risking a beating or a deduction in rations. Others work through, eyes glazed, limbs moving out of memory more than intent. Blisters reopen. Old wounds sting. The only relief comes when someone drops a tool and everyone pauses, grateful for a moment of interruption, even if it means another lecture from the overseer. There are moments that almost resemble camaraderie. A joke told in the right language travels the length of a wall. A song half remembered is picked up and passed along, the words changing with each retelling. Sometimes, when a stone fits perfectly, there is a brief sense of achievement, quickly crushed by the realization that tomorrow there will be another wall, another stone, another day exactly like this one. By afternoon, tempers fray. Arguments flare over whose turn it is to rest, whose mistake slowed the work, whose hands have grown soft with easier tasks. The overseers shout, the workers grumble, the work continues. Injuries are common: a finger smashed by a wayward brick, a foot crushed under a rolling stone, a back wrenched beyond easy repair. The healers do what they can, which is never enough. The priests wander the site, sprinkling holy water on the most promising walls, muttering blessings or warnings as the mood strikes them. No one knows if their rituals do any good, but no one is willing to take the risk of ignoring them. A worker once refused a blessing, and the next day was bitten by a snake. The story has been retold so many times that the snake now has 3 heads and a taste for lazy men. As dusk nears, the pace slows, the shadows stretch, and the heat begins to fade. The workers look toward the camp, toward the promise of rest, however meager. The overseer makes another round with his tablet, counting, always counting. Tools are stacked, stones covered with cloth, scaffolds checked for stability. There is a sense of something accomplished, but also the knowledge that nothing is ever truly finished. The walk back to camp is quiet, heavy with exhaustion. The evening meal is the same as always, sometimes less. The workers eat in silence or in small groups, sharing what news or jokes they have. The old men talk about better days. The young ones dream of leaving. Everyone agrees that the city is both too big and not big enough. Night falls, and with it, a kind of uneasy peace. Some gather around a fire, trading stories about the overseer's mistakes or the priest's hypocrisies. Others drift off to sleep, too tired even to dream. A few, more restless or more hopeful, sit awake, staring at the stars and imagining what the city might look like when it is finally finished, if it is ever finished at all. You lie on your back, bones aching, eyes gritty with dust. In the distance, you hear the quiet noises of the camp settling, the low voices of workers, the sighs of animals, the gentle creak of wood in the wind. You think about the day, how much was done, how little changed. The life of a builder, you realize, is not about making history. It is about surviving each sunrise and sunset, one after another, until the stones themselves forget who placed them there. And as sleep takes you, you know that tomorrow will be exactly the same. The sun will rise, the work will begin, and somewhere in the dust, the city will grow, slowly, painfully, endlessly, on the backs of those who build and are never remembered. The day the first great platform is finished should feel like a festival, or at the very least, a relief. For weeks, months, or perhaps forever, no one seems certain anymore. You have watched the stones stack higher, the mud dry, the sweat drip, the patience wear thin. And now, as the last slab is levered into place, and the overseer marks a careful line across his tablet, the platform is, by every official measure, complete. There is a pause, as if even the air itself is not quite sure what to do next. A few workers clap weakly, not so much in celebration as in muscle memory. Someone tries to start a song, but it falters after the first line. The sun glares down as always, unimpressed. The animals, sensing no change in routine, plod toward the water trough. In the distance, the priests begin their preparations for a blessing, their voices rising and falling with the practiced monotony of men who have blessed too many stones already. The overseer delivers a speech of sorts, standing on the platform he once doubted would ever stand. He thanks the workers, promises rest, assures everyone that their toil will be remembered by the king and by the gods. His words drift away on the wind, barely noticed by anyone except the scribes, who dutifully scratch them onto a clay tablet that will inevitably crack or be lost before the year is out. No one truly celebrates. The platform is a solid thing. Yes, a surface wide enough to hold a palace, or a temple, or the hopes of men who have little left to hope for. But for those who built it, it is just another surface to sweep, another shadow to stretch across the camp at sunset. The sense of achievement is dulled by the knowledge that tomorrow the work resumes, the next platform, the next wall, the next impossible deadline. There are small compensations. The overseer allows the workers an extra hour of rest in honor of your achievement, he says, as if sleep were a medal. A cauldron of gruel is served with a few extra onions floating in it, and the rumor of a ration of wine is enough to lift spirits for an hour or two. Children clamber onto the finished platform and race along its length, their laughter the only sound that seems genuinely joyful. But for every small pleasure, there is a larger disappointment. The priests, after a perfunctory blessing and a handful of sacrifices, take the choicest cuts of meat for themselves. The promised day of rest is quickly revealed to be an afternoon only, cut short by an urgent delivery of new stone. The scribes, busy as ever, begin measuring out new plots and marking fresh lines on the earth. You hear someone joke, "We should have built the platform lower. Maybe then the work would be finished sooner." The laughter is tired, but real. As night falls, the platform casts a long shadow across the camp. The workers gather at its edge, sharing bread and stories, comparing blisters, remembering the effort of every lifted stone. There is talk of the future, but only in practical terms. Which part of the city will rise next? How much more stone must be quarried? Will the rains come early and wash away the work? A few men recall stories of other cities, other platforms, built and abandoned, raised and raised. They compare scars and calluses, not with pride, but with the resignation of those who know their work will never truly be finished. Someone points to the sky, where a thin plume of smoke rises from the priest's fire. "There's your firework," he says. "All the celebration you are going to get." Despite the exhaustion, or perhaps because of it, you find yourself walking the length of the platform after dark. The stones are cool under your feet, the air finally softening. You remember the first days when this place was only dust and empty promise. Now, at least there is something to stand on, a testament to endurance, if not to hope. Still, you cannot help but feel that something is missing. The platform is finished, but the sense of accomplishment is quickly replaced by the old familiar restlessness. Already, the overseer's lists have grown longer. Already, the first supplies for the next stage are arriving. Already, the rumor has spread that the king will demand a platform twice as large, a wall twice as high, a labor twice as hard. The only real firework is the sigh of the workers as they drift to sleep, knowing that the dawn will bring nothing but more of the same. In Persepolis, completion is always temporary, satisfaction always outpaced by demand. Even the gods seem weary, their blessings mumbled and their offerings hurried. You lie on your back, the new platform under your head, and look up at the stars. The city grows, and so does your fatigue. Tomorrow, another platform. Tomorrow, another firework of disappointments, of small joys, of days blending into one another until the city is built or you are dust, whichever comes first. There comes a morning, indistinguishable at first from the thousands that came before, when you realize you are no longer needed. The platform is done, the columns stand tall, the walls rise even in your sleep, and the city, at last, seems to be building itself. Your name, which was once called at dawn and scratched onto tablets and passed down the rows of workers, is now forgotten. You are simply one of many. You are part of the dust, the echo of footsteps between stones. No ceremony marks your leaving. No scribe records your absence. No priest offers a blessing for your journey. You pack your few belongings: a strip of cloth, a blunt knife, a shard of pottery inscribed with a joke you barely remember, and step away from the camp as quietly as you arrived. The morning is cool and empty. The overseer, already absorbed in new problems, barely glances up as you walk past. The animals nudge at their feed. The children, half asleep, chase a tired dog through the alleys of tents. The city wakes without you, and this, you realize, is as it should be. You pause once at the edge of the site to look back. Persepolis, the city of kings and dreams and sweat and failures, is no longer an idea, but a fact. Its platforms, columns, and walls are unmistakable against the blue-white dawn. You can see wars, hundreds, perhaps thousands, moving in silent lines, lifting, hauling, chanting, shouting. In the distance, the smoke of morning fires twists above the rooftops, caught between ambition and apathy. The first columns cast long, thin shadows over the unfinished courtyards. Somewhere, priests are already at their rituals, sprinkling water and barley, cursing or blessing as the mood demands. Scribes frown over new tablets. The architect argues over angles and sunlight. The king's envoy, sleeves too clean for this place, paces a half-built terrace and imagines the glory that will one day be his to claim. For all of them, today is just another page, another set of numbers, another stone to place. You wonder, as you pass the last boundary of the city, what will become of Persepolis? Will it be finished? Will it become the jewel of the empire, the envy of foreign kings, the city whose very name is a song? Or will it burn, crumble, fade, just another mark in the long ledger of the world's forgetfulness? Will anyone walking these platforms centuries from now remember you or any of the workers whose lives were spent in the shadow of this ambition? Memory is a strange thing. You carry Persepolis with you in the aches of your bones, in the grit beneath your nails, in the dreams that wake you sweating in the night. You remember the first stone, lifted with trembling arms and fake hope. You remember the mud after the rain, the taste of onions and thin gruel, the songs hummed at dusk, the columns raised with groans and laughter. You remember the priests, the rituals, the bureaucrats, the overseers' lists, endless, tireless, never satisfied. But the city itself forgets. Its stones do not remember your name. The platforms do not care whose back carried the heaviest block. The carved faces stare down at nothing, mouths forever shut, eyes blind to the camps and graves that ring the sacred walls. History, when it comes, will be written in the language of kings, not in the dust and sweat of those who built for them. You keep walking, out past the last piles of unused stone, through a field where discarded tools rust in the sun. At the river's edge, you find a group of new arrivals, already arguing over whose turn it is to carry the buckets, already learning the hierarchy of hunger and hope. You nod to them, and they nod back, not knowing you or caring to. For them, Persepolis is not history, but fate, a future measured in rations and bruises. The city fades behind you, the sound of hammers and orders drifting away until there is only the wind and your own quiet footsteps. You wonder if you will ever stop thinking in numbers, stones hauled, hours worked, meals missed. You wonder if, in another place, you might learn to rest, to wake up without the weight of unfinished walls pressing down on your dreams. Night comes. You find a place to sleep, a patch of ground just beyond the reach of any shadow, under stars that are neither cruel nor kind, just distant and unmoved. You fall asleep with the knowledge that Persepolis will continue, that someone else will lift the next stone, write the next line, offer the next prayer. Persepolis remains. You are gone. The city does not know the difference. But as you close your eyes, you remember that you were here, not a king, not a priest, not a name in a story, but a pair of hands, a watcher, a builder. You breathe out dust, and for a moment, the world is silent. Tomorrow, the city will grow again. Tomorrow, it will forget you once more. But for tonight, you know what it means to be the shadow that passed through stone, and that for a while, Persepolis belonged to you, even if no one ever writes it down.